Meloney Linder grew up in Fergus Falls, Minnesota, spent the first half of her career in the private sector marketing, and eventually found her way into higher education. Between a scrappy first-generation university in South Texas, a flagship research school in Wisconsin, and everywhere in between. Today, she's the vice president for marketing and communications at the University of North Dakota, where she spent 8 years doing something harder than it sounds: helping a university remember who it is. She walked into UND in 2018 during a genuine identity crisis. The Fighting Sioux logo was gone, the brand had just been reset, and nobody fully believed in it yet. What happened next is a masterclass in what it actually takes to build trust, not through clever campaigns, but through consistency, story, and the patience to let a community find its own voice. I'm Max Kringen, and this is Tell All the Podcast, and here's our conversation with my new friend and yours, Meloney Linder.
Over the rainbow.
Meloney Linder, welcome to Tell All the Podcast.
Hi, so happy to be here, Max.
Oh my gosh, Meloney, we connected, probably a month or so ago now, and just slid into your DMs, and I was like, we have lots of folks who we get to work with that use UND as an example of what they want to look like, sound like, feel like as a university. And so we'll get into that a little bit more, but that's why I slid into your DMs. But before we start that, can we just start with who is Meloney?
Wow. So I'm the vice president for marketing and communications at the University of North Dakota. I have been in this role. I'm finishing up my 8th year. Prior to that, I worked at the University of Wisconsin-Madison at the School of Business. Before that, I was at an institution, the University of Texas at Brownsville, which is now the University of Texas of the Rio Grande Valley. But prior to that, I was in private sector for the first half of my career doing anything from project management, media buying. I did corporate communications, the whole 9 yards. So kind of have walked the gamut of different roles that have I think, positioned me well for the position that I'm in now.
I love that. So I might push you a little bit. That's
Okay.
Meloney the professional. Who's Meloney the person?
Wow. So I'm originally from Fergus Falls, Minnesota. So I'm an OTC girl, as I like to call it. Love Lake Country. Have lived all over the country, but there's always a draw to come back. So again, coming back, working at UND got me back closer to the area. I love it here. I am a mom of 2 grown, amazing daughters that keep me on my toes and push me to be better every day. So, yeah, and I am a wife and I like to golf. I like to travel. I'm a fur mom. I have a little puppy that is just, love, 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 love so much. Those are all the little things about me.
I love it.
What else would you like to know?
I was gonna say, what's your new puppy's name?
Her name is Sophie, and she's 3.5 years old. She's a little 15-pound Havanese.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. My dog is in my my signature, my email signature in the photo, and I have more people that comment on Kevin than anybody else. So
Sophie has her own Instagram account. It's mainly for my own entertainment, but yeah.
Okay, I was going to say, we'll have to exchange that because Kevin is Kevin from Fargo on Instagram. So he doesn't post nearly as much as he should.
Sophie's the same.
I love that. That makes me so happy. So let's get into this a little bit because one of the things that you and I talked about a little bit when you walked into UND, you kind of walked into a time where they were kind of having an identity crisis, right? And so the Fighting Sioux logo was gone. The brand had just been reset and nobody was really sure that they believed in it yet. And so I'm curious, and we're really jumping in the deep end, I realize, but
that's all right.
What is it actually like to inherit a story that isn't fully written? How did you figure out where to start?
Sometimes it's just jumping off the deep end, right? I mean, I think I'll be really honest in that I think it helped that I was new. I joined in 2018, so I wasn't in this role when they went through this Fighting Sioux logo issue or the budget cuts. So then I came in with this fresh perspective. And it also gave me some grace with people who like, okay, let's see what her ideas are, right? But as I had mentioned to you, so the Leader in Actions was determined, it was 2017, and I joined in 2018. And so my role was like, how do you make this real? The actual work in developing the brand was really solid, interviewing our community of faculty, staff, students, community members, alumni about, what are the things that make UND UND? I mean, we're doers, we're action oriented, we're North Dakotan, we're Midwest, right? All of those things are true. And prior to Leaders in Action, and this is actually true for a lot of universities, athletics becomes the brand identity. So then what do you do when that brand has changed and doesn't necessarily have the full buy-in from everybody? I phrased it as we had to give people other reasons to believe in UND. Athletics is amazing and it's important and it builds community. But an institution of higher ed is more than just athletics. We have amazing programs. We have amazing students that have these wonderful stories to tell. We have amazing faculty, and they're doing really great work. So now we ground that in what we identified are the characteristics of what makes UND, UND. And you start telling those stories, but you're really consistent in that the stories represent what UND is all about. And so again, when I get questions about the athletic logos, I always say, athletics is great. I understand why we made the change. We're now Fighting Hawks. There's still a love of the old logo. Many of our alums, that's what they came through UNDS. So there's an affinity there. But there are so many other reasons for them to be proud of this institution. And that's what we need to focus on. And that's what we did focus on. And then eventually people started seeing these stories and like, yeah, that is who we are. I agree with that. And they just hadn't seen it before because everything was so focused on the athletic mark, which again, as I said before, that's very common in higher ed because so much affinity and community is built around that area. So I like to say you need to know your brand, you need to know who you are. That's your base. And then again, the storytelling is reaffirming all of the things that are already true, but you're telling them.
There is so much to pull apart in what you just said. And I think it's so true that like universities are these fascinating creatures and like living things. Right. And so often, very much in the same way as people oftentimes get kind of pigeonholed as their profession, as their, what is the thing that I can gravitate towards, the thing that I can see in front of me versus what is their DNA? What is it that who they are and what they believe? And so
Yeah.
I think that that is so rich. I'm curious, was there a moment where you felt like the brand really started to become real for people, right? And not just like a positioning document?
Yeah. Yeah. When I knew it had become real is we were coming out of COVID and our new president, President Andrew Armacost, he had joined in the spring of 2020. But obviously, normally you would do a strategic plan right away with the new president. Our other strategic plan had kind of reached the end of life, but we were coming out of the pandemic, so we waited. So after, I think it was spring of 2022, kicked off what was going to be our strategic planning. And it was a very bottom up driven plan. There were 7 working groups. There were surveys. We had over almost 1,000 people between faculty, staff, students, community members, and alumni that participated in developing of the strategic plan. And throughout that process, they kept referring to we're leaders, the whole leaders in action piece. And everything they were developing for, it's our lead strategic plan. Everything reinforced the brand. But it wasn't my team that suggested it. It was our community. So that was a real moment for me where I was like, okay, now we've done our jobs well because this happened organically. It wasn't trying to force feed it to our community. They were like, no, this is who we are. And that drove all the messaging under the strategic plan that we're still working under. So for me, that was that really proud moment of, yep, it's real.
I resonate with that so much because, like, when we get to do strategy work with clients, we
Mhm.
oftentimes get the credit for coming up with these ideas. But really, all we're doing is we're just like taking in all of the words, all of the feelings that they're sharing with us, molding them, putting them into a framework, and then presenting them back. And
But
so
that's what makes the brand real, right?
that's what makes it real because it's not about marketing, right? It's not about quippy taglines and things like that. It's what are these natural things that are actually just bubbling up? And for you guys, that was leaders in action.
It was, and I think like you and I had I'm gonna shift gears back
Yeah,
to one of our previous conversations, if I can do that for you. You
please.
remember we talked about so many people will talk about a brand, and what they really talk about is a logo, and they'll talk about a tagline, and that's fine, but a logo's not your brand, and a tagline isn't who you are. A marketing campaign could last 6 months, a year, 2 years, but a brand, it's in your DNA and it's foundational. And the way that you get real traction in building that brand is consistency over time. It's also important that you don't do things that counter your brand because then people lose trust or that you're having an identity crisis. Like, who are you if you're constantly changing all the time, right? That doesn't say a brand can't change, but it usually evolves, right? It's not that changing out with a different campaign. A campaign changes more quickly than a brand ever will.
So unpack that for us because I'm curious, what does that look like to both stay consistent? It's like how do you stay consistent but also build in enough flexibility for
Mhm.
freshness, right? Like
Mhm.
like you want to make sure that prospective students, the messaging has to change a little bit based on who we're trying to bring in, who we're trying to reach at different times. So what does that balancing act like actually look like and sound like?
Well, first, a brand can have different tonalities, the same way that, a paint color can be. You can have a pink, but there's lots of shades of pink, right? We love Kelly Green, always Kelly Green. There's no other shade. It's always Kelly. But we'll have tonality based on if we're talking to high schoolers or are we talking to our current student or someone who might be an adult learner. Might be very different too when we're dealing with corporate partners, community members, alumni, etc. The brand doesn't change, but the tonality of how we speak to people might change. So I think that's important to start right there. So repeat the rest of it because that was the point at which you were chatting. I kind of went on a little tangent there.
I love the tangent. It
Yeah.
was really like how do you see that
Yep.
show up, right?
Perfect. So the other piece gets into we do a lot of testing always on our creative, right? And when it comes to the brand, we do brand health surveys every so many years. And as part of that survey, we will also test creative elements and language elements and find out what's resonating now. Again, going back to those stakeholders that I mentioned, they get that brand survey. And so depending on what's resonating, sometimes we think we can try something new and push it out, but they're not ready for it. So then we'll scale back. And so I think I'm a firm believer in data, that you need to have data to know what's working. But even more important, you need to have data to know what's not working. And you need the ability to, what they say, fail fast or adjust quickly. You need to be able to modify quickly. You can't wait 6 months in this current environment to try something, see if it works. You need to have a faster feedback cycle. And that helps you know when you can evolve the brand. And it tells you when you need to change a campaign. We do a lot of testing, we do a lot of measurements, so we know what's working, we know what's not working. And I've always said, if we're going to fail, fail fast. And then things that are working, how do you double it down and make it better? Like, so we're constantly in that evolution. And I think that's really important.
So let's keep pulling on that thread for a little bit because when we chatted last, you had mentioned that data has become your best tool for
Yes.
managing the everybody thinks they know marketing problem that all marketers get to
Mhm.
deal with,
Yeah.
right? Where it's kind of redirecting that conversation from like, I don't like that billboard to let's look at what's actually moving the needle. I'm curious, how did you build that data focused culture from scratch?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think some of it is coming from private sector, and then also when I transitioned into higher ed, faculty are researchers. So how do you build
Speaking their language.
credibility, right? How do you build credibility? You need to show them the data. They like to sift and winnow to the truth, right? And data is something that really helps ground that conversation because without data, Max, you have an opinion, Melanie has an opinion, but there's no way to advance one or the other just because you think you're right, I think I'm right. Again, how do you ground the conversation? So when we started the measuring, and we measure everything from our public relations to our marketing campaigns, et cetera. We started small because we hadn't done it before. At UND, there wasn't the systems in place to start tracking. So I always said, test something. What can we test and learn from? And then eventually you just keep building on what you've already done. You don't go from 0 to 180 overnight without a lot of time and resources. And so we started slowly, started having these conversations. Again, I mentioned the brand health survey. We could always go back to that. And I report out every semester how we're doing so I can show the data. They can ask questions. And still to this day, we've been doing this. I said I'm in my 8th year. I still get someone that will say to me, I don't see any of your marketing. What are you actually doing? And in some cases, so then I'll run through all the tactics that we're doing and why we do the various tactics. Some are general awareness, some are more action oriented. And the ones that are more action oriented, I let them know you're not my target audience. You work here.
Yeah.
You're not a prospective student. So if you're seeing all of my marketing, I'm wasting my money. So we have those conversations, but again, I can actually ground it in what we're doing and what are the returns. And that really helps have a much more objective conversation. Now, then they can give me new ideas of like, did you know this about this program? And this is a differentiator in this program. And that's awesome stuff, right? And then they'll tell me, going back to the storytelling where we started, they're like, have you talked to this student? They're doing this really cool stuff, or this faculty member's doing this really cool stuff. And it's just the conversation. So they help us do our work better. And I always tell them too, I know we're Midwest modest up here, so let my team do the bragging for you.
Absolutely. I think that it's also really smart that they get kind of a sandbox to plan, right? Like we use this idea of like, you send somebody out into a desert and they're going to be like, I don't know where to start. But when you give them a sandbox, then we have a frame of reference to
Yeah.
be going from, to even say like, hey, here's our sandbox within this program. Now we can be like feeding it ideas really purposefully and like have active and purposeful contribution. That's really powerful.
Yeah, it's really good conversation.
Has there ever been a time, I'm sure there has, but, like, can you think of a time when, like, the data surprised you where, like, your assumption was, like, so far off and you just got to, like, either keep a campaign or you had to completely change a campaign based on what the data was telling you?
No, we never had it where it completely threw us off. And part of the reason is, again, the culture of failing fast, right? We're testing stuff enough and quickly that you're not caught flat footed as often. And when we do make changes, we do it slowly. So I don't wipe everything out and like, okay, now we're just going to do something completely different and just shock the market. There's this level of gradual changes that we'll make and then see how it does. So we're not caught in that awkward moment, so to speak. But there's been a couple of times where I thought we were ready to introduce some new elements and our community was not ready. And that's not our internal community. They were ready. It was the external community, prospective students and others were like, it's not resonating. Okay. Got to move a little bit more slowly on this one. But that's good to learn, right?
Ah, it's great. It's great to learn, right? When you stop learning, you're dying,
Yeah.
right? And I
Yeah.
think I love that perspective. What has been so you've been there for 8 years.
Yep.
What has been the story that has surprised you about UND?
Story that surprised me. You know, when I started at UND, I was like, I again grew up kind of in the area. I have lots of high school friends that went to UND, and you always knew about aviation. Didn't know we designed the spacesuits for NASA. Didn't know that, we have this amazing UAS ecosystem, and we were really on the forefront of all of that. And we have some amazing arts and sciences and humanities program. The med school, just some of the amazing things that we're doing there. So much of what I knew about UND was just a few of those nuggets that were like, aerospace is a crown jewel for UND without a doubt. But there's so many others too. And I think those were the stories that kind of surprised me because I just didn't hear them before I joined UND. The other thing that I'll say is this is one proud community and they love this institution. And so um, s- there's really good people to work with.
Those are incredible stories to get the opportunity to share as well, because they're also so visual. I think that's something that I think a lot of universities, higher education are maybe a little bit envious of, like just how visual the storytelling can be. At
Yeah.
UND, how do you balance that? Because like a lot of the folks that might be listening are like, hey, like we have this really great humanities program that isn't
Yeah.
visual,
Yeah.
right? How do you balance those
It
two?
is visual. They're all visual. So we'll do student profiles and we'll interview them to tell the story in the Q&A. And you can get this great, beautiful photography,
Mhm.
but then we'll put them on camera and we'll pair their interview with them in action, doing the work. And, and so there's always ways to make it visual, always.
So higher education as a whole is at kind of a weird moment right now, right? There are a lot of universities that are facing an enrollment cliff, competing with tech CEOs telling kids that they don't need a degree, right? Trying to justify a 4-year investment in a TikTok world. You guys are fighting that every day and you're fighting it successfully from what the numbers are
Yeah.
showing. I'm curious, how do you tell that story right now? And what do you wish more people knew about what's actually at stake?
Well, how do we tell the story about the value of higher ed is telling the stories of our students and what their experience has been like, how they grew, how they used that as they went into their own professional careers. And we can tell stories about alums that are living, say, across the state and they came to UND or maybe they did their degree online because they were working with families and that's what worked for them. But the people themselves that got the degree or that are in the process of getting the degree are the best spokespeople, the most believable spokespeople for the value of higher ed. The younger generations today question those in authority probably more than we did when we were their age. The media questions higher ed leadership as well. So peer to peer communication can be really powerful.
Brilliant. The through line of the entire conversation today has been let the community speak for itself.
Yeah.
Right? Let the people who are experiencing it, let the authenticity kind of shine through instead of trying to come up with clever marketing messages, instead of trying to
Oh,
come up with those things, just like let the folks speak for themselves.
yeah. They're your best spokespeople. They
Well,
really are.
I feel like we could nerd out about a lot of different
Mhm.
things, but we do have to kind of come in for a landing. And so,
Okay.
two final questions that we always ask here on Tell Well the podcast. The first one is, as you know, or maybe don't know, because maybe you haven't listened to this podcast yet, but you will after today, I'm sure. We believe stories shape the way that we show up, the way shape really who we are. I'm curious, what is one story from your life or your work that still shapes the way that you show up today?
So I've been extremely fortunate that I've had a lot of different people in my life that have mentored me. I've also had a lot of people in my life who have challenged me, and you learn from both, which is fantastic. I have learned from those individuals that authenticity matters. And every one of us has something special about us that we bring to the table. And don't try to fit into the mold of someone else. Own those amazing qualities of yourself. And I think that's really, really important. And then as I mentioned when you asked a little bit more about me, I have two daughters. One's 23, one's 21. Amazing, brilliant, total mommy bias, right? But they truly are. And ever since I had them, it pushed me to be a better person. And they hold me accountable in ways of, be the best. And I think that having them in my life has just it's been a blessing. It keeps me sharp. And they're some of my number one cheerleaders. So that's pretty great.
That's incredible. Our final question is a pretty simple one, but simple isn't always easy. So what's one simple good thing that you would leave people with? Your fellow mission-driven leaders. This could be a piece of wisdom or a reminder that helps them lead with purpose.
So this is not a quote that I developed. I was in some kind of leadership seminar one time and I heard it and it really stuck with me. And now I say it to everybody when they ask me a similar question. And that is, feedback is a gift. And the reason why feedback is a gift is because people only give you truly good feedback. And I say good meaning critical feedback is either they care about the work or they care about you. And if you're lucky, it's both. So feedback truly is a gift. And if you think about that in that way, it makes taking in that information easier because you know where it's coming from. And this other side of that I tell people is when giving feedback, think of it as a gift. So when you're giving it to someone, express it in such a way that they know it's because you care about the work or you care about them or both. And I think both. I think that's really important.
That I love all of it because I'm a big Adam Grant fan and even Kim Scott and Radical Candor and that idea of repositioning feedback as a gift is really, really powerful. And something that Adam Grant talks about is this idea of vulnerability on both sides of it, right? We make the assumption that the vulnerability is just on the person receiving the feedback.
Yeah.
But what we forget about is it is an exercise of trust to be able to share with somebody something that maybe isn't going so well. And that is a moment of vulnerability on both sides, and that expectation to be able to receive it back to challenge the feedback as well, which makes that feedback so much richer and healthier.
And in the end, that can really strengthen your relationship with that individual because, as you said, both individuals are being vulnerable, but why you're doing it is very transparent, and it just opens it up for a really good dialogue.
Amen. Well, Meloney, if folks want to connect with you, where do they do that?
Sure. I'm on LinkedIn. And I'm also, you can email me the old fashioned way. It's Meloney, meloney.linder@und.edu.
Meloney, thanks so much for joining us here on Tell the Podcast. Thanks for all the ways that you're showing up for students and empowering them to share their own stories to invite more folks into the UND family. And thanks again for being on.
Thank you for this. This has been so much fun.
Thanks for spending some time with us today. I hope this conversation gave you something useful to take back to your work. If you're looking for more resources on storytelling, strategy, and building communications that actually move people to action, head on over to WeTellWell.com. We've got guides, case stories, and plenty of ways to dig deeper. And if you're at a point where you're ready to get serious about clarifying your message or telling your story in a bigger way, let's talk. You can book a planning call with our team right on the website. We'd love to hear what you're working on. One last thing. If this episode was helpful, share it with someone on your team or leave us a review. It really does help other mission-driven folks find the show. I'm Max Kringen. Thanks for listening to Tell Well the Podcast. Now go tell your story well, because a well-told story can move your mission forward and change the world.